Today we shall continue with our short series of Dhamma talks on the gradual path of training, and today we shall explore, what do you think? Huh? You have any idea? No?
Yesterday was mindfulness and clear comprehension.
And then, this will be followed by? By the Five Hindrances, of course. By what is happening in your meditation, in the meditation practice of some meditators here. And so I'm always trying to give these Dhamma talks kind of timely, so that they really correspond to what the majority is experiencing. But it's not always easy, because there's some who advance quickly, and others who take a little bit more time. Anyways, the main steps or main stations on the gradual path of training consist, as we've explained, of the initial gaining of some faith, namely in the Dhamma and then in the Buddha, and this then is followed by right thought, nekama in the Pali scripture, or sammasankappa in the form of nekama, which is renunciation. So temporary or permanent renunciation of one's household life. And this then, the next major step on the gradual path of training of a meditator is that of training in virtue, sila, and then restraint of the senses is another important aspect along the path, and then after this then come mindfulness and clear comprehension, and we dealt with these two yesterday. Now today we need to, or it's high time to explore the five hindrances. Now, first of all, to give you a quote from the text, and I don't even know exactly what, or I can't even give you the exact reference, but it's definitely from the Buddha's words on the five hindrances. A meditator has cast away the sense desire, kama chanda. He or she dwells with a heart free from sense desire. From sense desire, he or she cleanses the heart. A meditator has cast away aversion, vyapada, and he or she dwells with a heart free from aversion, cherishing love and compassion towards all living beings. The meditator cleanses his or her heart from aversion. And a meditator then has cast away sloth and torpor, tina metta. He or she dwells free from sloth and torpor, loving the light with watchful mind, with clear comprehension. The meditator cleanses the mind from sloth and torpor. A meditator has cast away restlessness and remorse, uddhacca and kukucca, in Pali, dwelling with mind undisturbed, with heart full of peace, and the meditator cleanses the mind from restlessness and remorse. And the last one is a meditator has cast away doubt, vicikicca in Pali, dwelling free from doubt, full of confidence in the good. He or she cleanses the heart from doubt. So this much regarding the text, the relevant text on the five hindrances as given in the context of the gradual path of training. Now, these hindrances are interesting. Interesting in the sense that in a group of meditators, like our group here, a group of meditators who all start at the same day and so then meditate together, following more or less the same schedule. Well, these hindrances come up for most people more or less around the same time. So, a few days certainly into retreat, the hindrances are there. When one starts out, the main difficulties lie in the arising of frequent wandering mind and sloth and torpor. After a while, after battling these, they kind of subside temporarily, and then sooner or later, the hindrances come or arise full on. And these hindrances in the Pali scriptural language are known as the Pancha Nivarani. Pancha stands for 5, and Nivarana is the hindrance. Nivarani is plural. So the 5 hindrances. Now, why are they called the hindrances? Because they obstruct the way to a heavenly rebirth, and they also obstruct or hinder the attainment of Nibbana. Now, we've said that these hindrances occur in the context of the Vipassana or Satipatthana meditation. Do these same 5 hindrances occur also in the context of some other meditation? And if so, which one? Who knows? Samatha, yes, indeed. And so, there they occur like in the Satipatthana meditation, at least at the very beginning, and namely before the jhanic factors can arise. The jhanic factors connected with the first jhana. Now, these hindrances, as the term indicates already, what do you think? Are they tremendously wholesome in nature or tremendously unwholesome in nature? Huh? Unwholesome, of course. And so, as such, be prepared that they'll give you trouble in one way or another. And so the hindrances, these 5 hindrances are, part of the mental defilements, the so-called kilesas, the 14 kilesas. And so about the defilements, it is said that they defile the mind, they torment the mind in which they arise, they burn the mind in which they arise, and they soil the mind, and they drag a being to a lower state in whose mind they arise. And so there's obviously not much good that goes along with these 5 hindrances. Now, the 5 hindrances, even though they're given as 5 in number, in actuality there are more to them. Namely, there are 7 to them. 7, and in a wider sense that we can include even ignorance. And the reason why they're not just 5 but 7 has to do with the fact that the hindrance of sloth and torpor actually consists of 2 unwholesome mental states. Sloth is one and torpor is another one. And the hindrance, restlessness and remorse, in terms of mental states also figures as 2, namely restlessness, uddhacca, being one, and kukucca, remorse or worry, being the second one. And there are different classification or different numbers of hindrances around, and sometimes they are also mentioned in connection with ignorance as the last one. And this is obvious, since all unwholesome mental states are always arise in connection with ignorance, avijja. Now, an illustration that is given in the Anguttara Nikaya, namely as follows. There are 5 impurities of gold which make it very difficult to work this gold. And when gold is impaired by these certain 5 impurities, then it is not pliant, not wieldy, lacks radiance, is brittle, and cannot be wrought well. Now, what are those 5 impurities? Namely, iron, copper, tin, lead, and silver. However, it is certainly said that and that's the experience of a goldsmith, when gold is free from these 5 impurities of iron, copper, tin, lead, and silver, then it will be pliant and wieldy, radiant and firm, and can be wrought well into various kinds of ornaments. Now, likewise for a mind in which the 5 hindrances arise. A mind in which the 5 hindrances, the 5 impurities arise, is not pliant, is not wieldy, lacks radiance, is brittle, and cannot be formed or wrought well. However, a mind freed of those 5 hindrances is pliant, is wieldy, is radiant and firm, and can be wrought well. Now, in the samatha practice, as long as the hindrances arise in one's stream of consciousness, then a meditator cannot reach this neighborhood concentration, upachara samadhi, nor full concentration. And likewise, in the presence of the hindrances, a meditator, a vipassana meditator, cannot clearly discern mind from matter. Now, the hindrances are given in a certain sequence, and oftentimes they also occur in practice in this sequence, although frequently meditators don't necessarily or don't feel comfortable to mention the first hindrance, which is sense desire. Now, to explain the Vipassana psychological point of view with regard to the development of those hindrances. What we have to understand is that the mind in its ordinary state, so untrained, untamed state, likes to be wild. And it likes to, it enjoys its freedom of going wherever it pleases. So it loves roaming around, going here, going there, going into future, going into the past, and all these things. Now, then comes the terrible day for this untamed mind when we start to subjugate it to a Vipassana retreat. And indeed, bad news for the mind. And the reason is that what's the word for that? I'm looking for a particular word. Well, we expose it to this mindfulness practice, and to make things worse, it's even Mahasi style the mindfulness practice, where meditators are called to be mindful from moment to moment without any gap. And as a meditator is starting to be mindful from moment to moment, and is not giving in to it, the mind starts resenting it. And it thinks, well, this is a pretty awkward situation. How do I get out of this? and so then it comes up with all sorts of sensuous thoughts about the wonderful food that Beth is going to prepare tomorrow, and how one will enjoy this, and how one will take a second helping, if not a third helping. Or while one is exposing this mind to this thorough and sometimes even cruel training of Vipassana, the mind will start thinking of one's relatives, one's near and dear ones, one's loved ones, such as one's husband or one's wife or partner or child, or even one's grandchild or one's niece, and one longs for them. And one sits there in meditation, one says, forget about this rising and falling. I've spent already enough time on it. The next interview is far away, so let me use the time in between to, at least mentally visit my relatives. And then one gets oneself into some longing, and mentally enjoying being with them, and just thinking how all of this would be. Now, unfortunately, there's an end to this, namely, it comes in the form of the next interview, where the teacher then sternly says, please be mindful of your sense desire, and don't forget to label it, and just observe it. And try to let go of it and try to overcome it. Now, that then is the end of sense desire. And so the meditator applies the instruction, and then sense desire has no longer a chance to arise in the mind. But the mind still resents being tamed. And so then it thinks, well, if I'm not allowed to think about the food that Beth is going to prepare tomorrow, or about my loved ones, or something else, some encounter from the past, then it sort of goes into a different mode. And then it notices, there's this meditator who's sniffing a lot in the meditation hall again and again. And I'm supposed to be mindful here. I'm supposed to develop concentration. How can I develop concentration and wisdom if this fellow meditator keeps sniffing? And So then the mind gets totally obsessed with this sniffing fellow meditator, and then the mind works itself into, a rather angry state. And so what started as just a little bit hearing, a little bit of sniffing, turns into something like, no, under these circumstances I can't practice, and this is too much. Maybe it's high time to leave this retreat. Either me or this sniffing meditator. And then one even contemplates writing the person a note. Unfortunately, there's a rule here that meditators among each other should not write notes. Oh well, then what to do? And the anger turns into rage, and things get really bad. And so then comes the next interview. One relates this, and the meditation teacher says, "Oh well, did you ever consider taking this anger as an object of observation?" "Oh, sorry, I forgot." and then, so from this point onwards, the meditator then starts being mindful of this anger. And actually, I even forgot to mention, sometimes when this anger arises, this hindrance of anger arises in the mind, then it gets to a point where one feels like a pressure cooker. Any time this pressure cooker can explode. And so the situation is rather dangerous. But then, fortunately, one remembers to be mindful, and so then eventually, the anger gets diffused, and then things are okay for a while, but not for too long. And the mind still resents being tamed. So it's now already the second time. The sense desire didn't work. Getting angry didn't work either. And so then the mind says, okay, if things are like this, I'll just go on strike. And I'll do this. There's a word for it. Never mind. I'll just be non-cooperative simply by nodding. And so I'll use this time to catch up on sleep. As you know, during the night it's quite cold in your tents. It might not be all that pleasant, so maybe you didn't get enough rest. But now in the meditation hall it's nice and warm, and so this is a wonderful time to catch up on sleep. And so the mind then refuses to observe the rising and falling or any other predominant object, and instead it goes into the sleeping mode. Now this won't help you to know the true nature of the rising movement nor of the falling movement of the abdomen. And then sitting after sitting, you find yourself nodding there. And so you might realize, well, this is not working either. And so then, after a while, you remember to be mindful, and then you also raise your effort, and with this, eventually, the sloth and torpor passes. However, this is not the end of the story yet. And so the mind that still prefers to go wild and to roam about and to do whatever it likes, to think the thoughts it likes, and so then it says, well, I'll be again not cooperative by simply getting restless. And so then a meditator experiences, for no particular reason, a tremendous amount of restlessness, both mental as well as physical. And so previously one was sitting quite calmly and nodding, no problem with restlessness at that point, but all of a sudden one finds oneself fidgeting, changing one's posture in the face of the slightest pain, and then opening the eyes and seeing, what are the other meditators doing? Are they really working hard? And so on, and then checking the time. And checking the time, what do you think? Helps or makes it... Especially if you realize that there's still 10 minutes to go, then this won't make things easier. It will not make things easier. And so after a while of this restlessness, then you might find that your mind suddenly remembers some unfinished business from the past. You said something, you did something that maybe after all wasn't all that great, and now you think, I shouldn't have said this, I shouldn't have done this, and so then regret arises, remorse arises, and the mind gets totally agitated about something that happened maybe 20 years ago, but you're right here. And so as this restlessness, both the restlessness and the remorse, create a lot of agitation. Sooner or later, you remember the instruction to be mindful, and then eventually, both the restlessness as well as the worry and remorse die down. And so then the instruction still remains the same, tame the mind through moment-to-moment mindfulness. Now, then the mind comes up with the most dangerous way of a subversive way of non-cooperation. And then, as one is sitting there and observing, patiently observing the rising and falling or some other predominant object, then thoughts crop up in the mind in the form of questions. I've been here already 3 days now, and my practice is not going anywhere. Is this method really working? And then one remembers, some other retreat from the past, maybe some dynamic Vipassana meditation which seemed much better in retrospection. And this teacher doesn't know what he's talking about, and so the altitude is giving me trouble. What's the use of being here? I might as well pack my things and leave right now. And with all of this, if one is not mindful, one becomes a victim of the hindrance of skeptical doubt. And skeptical doubt arises frequently in the form of questions, and doubting questions about the Buddha, about the Dhamma, about the Sangha, and then about the meditation method, and worst of all, about oneself, about one's own ability to do the practice, about the timing and the place. Maybe after all it's not the right time for me, and maybe this is not the right place for me, and maybe it's better if I just pack and then pack my backpack and then, without informing anyone, silently walk out of this place. And if one were to do this, what do you think? Would this be the right decision, or would this be a big mistake? Jackie, what do you think? It would be the biggest mistake. And Because if you were to have just 5 minutes more of patience, or if not 5, then let's say another 2 sittings or so, then you would discover that if you were to be mindful again, and you would just recognize, this is not, these doubting thoughts are actually objects of observation, and I should label them, I should be mindful of them, and those are doubting thoughts. So the hindrance of skeptical doubt is at work. So if one remembers all of this, then sooner or later those doubting thoughts will subside, and then instead some wholesome, some pleasant, some positive mental states will arise, and one feels how wonderful all of this is, and it was really worth coming here, and one is so happy that one didn't pack one's things, and that one didn't leave the retreat. So in the course of the meditation practice, things certainly may change dramatically. And so Satipatthana meditation is an up and down affair. Sometimes it's difficult, and sometimes the practice goes quite smoothly. Now, so it is in these different ways that the untamed, the untrained mind tries to get away from the practice itself, from being trained or tamed. And once one has overcome these hindrances, then it's already much easier to work with the mind. However, the hindrances won't be gone forever. Sooner or later in the practice they will crop up again, and then one will have to deal with them anew. But when this happens a second time or a third time, then this is not bad, because all of this will then strengthen the mind, and one's ability to overcome, to spot and to overcome these hindrances. And in general, we can say that whatever one learns during one's intensive meditation practice regarding the hindrances or some of the other unwholesome mental states, mental defilements, this will come in handy for one's daily life at home. And what do you think? Do the hindrances arise at home or not? Yes, they do. They do very much. And so if one on retreat, if one has learned to deal with them, then outside of retreat it will be much easier to then overcome them. And so a quarrel at home that usually may have lasted for 3 days now lasts only for half a day. And so, and if one then practices even more, then this may be a matter of just a few minutes. Now, let's go into the details. The details of some of the hindrances. I'm not going to talk on sloth and torpor, since most of you have already overcome this. Now, the way this sense desire, kama, chanda, nivarana, arises is not just longing for one's near and dear ones, but also longing for or desiring visible or visual sense objects, preferably desirable sense objects. So wanting to see some pleasant sight, like wanting to enjoy the beauty of the nature around here, or wanting to observe the sun rising, the sun setting, or wanting to watch some birds and certain similar things. And then this hindrance also manifests as wanting to hear or listen to some desirable sound in the form of music, or in the form of the sounds of nature, or it may be the sweet voice of some dear person, and so on. And then we also have the sense desire regarding some odor, some desirable odor, be it of a rose, or be it of some perfume, or whatever else. And desire, lots of desire might arise around food, and then also around pleasant or desirable tactile experiences. And a sense desire may arise even on a mental level. So even though one is not aware of anything material in the form of sight, sounds, or odors, but just some desirable memory arises, or some desirable image arises, and then one craves for it. Now, this hindrance of sense desire covers a variety of mental or aspects such as wanting, delighting, longing for, desire, and then liking, wishing, and then preferring, and so on. So there's certainly a variety there. And in the face of those, or in the presence of those desirable objects, and in the presence of sense desire, the mind will not be able to observe the most predominant object properly. Because, let's say you're observing some, the rising and falling movement of the abdomen, or some other object, it doesn't matter, and then sense desire comes in. The sense desire will pull your mind away from the primary object, and as a result of this, your mind will not go in the right, or your practice will not go in the right direction. Now, the characteristic of this sense desire, kamachanda, is grasping an object. And so to make it very clear, it's not letting go of an object, but grasping an object. And the function of the sense desire is sticking, namely sticking to the object, and the illustration given for this is like the meat sticks to a frying pan that doesn't have enough oil in it. And the sense desire manifests as not giving up. And the proximate cause for the arising of this hindrance of sense desire, or sense desire in general, is seeing enjoyment in things that actually lead to bondage. So under normal circumstances, from an ordinary worldling's point of view, looks like quite okay. From a supermundane point of view, actually it may be an object that we are in bondage with. So we're enslaved to that object. Now, An illustration that has been frequently given for the manifestation of sense desire is the following. Remember, the manifestation was as not giving up. Now, apparently, in Asia, there's a way of catching monkeys, and this is done by taking a coconut and then making an opening into that coconut and placing a banana in there. And then at the opposite end of the opening, there'll be another hole, and a rope will be tied to the coconut, and then the coconut will be attached to some tree somewhere in the forest. And the hunter will then go away, and sooner or later some monkey will show up and find this wonderful coconut, and playing with it or investigating it for a while, will discover that there's a wonderful banana right in there, and the monkey will then put its hands into the coconut, grasp the banana, and then will not let go of the banana. And then at that point, when the hunter comes, the amazing thing is that the monkey does not let go of the banana. So there's so much attachment to it that the monkey will hold on, continue to grasp and cling to the banana, even though the monkey gets caught by the hunter. All that monkey needs to do would be to release the banana and run off, but it doesn't just do that. And so the same thing goes for the mind that is overcome by sense desire. It certainly will not give up. Now, the texts say, namely the Samyutta Nikaya 46, Sutta 51, says there is a nourishment for essential desire, and there's also a denourishing of it. So if one keeps paying attention to some things that desirable objects, and when one is not mindful of then this will lead to the arising of sensual desire if it hasn't arisen yet, and it will lead to an increase of sensual desire if it has already arisen. And the denourishing of sensual desire comes by contemplating impure objects and not giving attention to desirable or being paying wise attention to desirable objects. And so in this way, a desire or a risen sense desire will weaken, and an unarisen sense desire will not arise. So it leads to a denourishing of sense desire. Now, the most obvious way of dealing with this sense desire is mindfulness itself, and here, first of all, to recognize the presence of the hindrance. Now, see, with these mental states, oftentimes we don't recognize them. We're not even aware that sense desire is present in the mind. And so the lack of recognition then leads to a situation where the sense desire simply goes on, and it might take on more and more momentum. But the very moment we are mindful of the presence of sense desire, this will make a huge difference, and then this will help to gradually, observing the sense desire will gradually help to overcome it. Now, the commentary to the Satipatthana Sutta recommends other methods of working with and overcoming sense desire. One is to learn how to do the meditation on impure objects. So, meditating or contemplating on the foulness, the impurity, the loathsomeness of the body. And then, secondly, to actually do this contemplation of impurity, and then, as we discussed the other day, to practice restraint of the senses. While our restraint of the senses is in place, sense desire cannot arise, at least not with regard to external objects. And the fourth way to overcome this sense desire is given as or recommended by the commentary as moderation in eating. So we should not give in to our desire for more and more delicious food, but rather be mindful while eating, and to eat only as much as is necessary to maintain and sustain this body, and to avoid harm, and to support the body or to support oneself while doing or undertaking this spiritual work. And then the commentary also recommends that one seek the friendship of some noble being, preferably a person who has very little sense desire himself or herself, or a person who's totally free from sense desire. And it's oftentimes that in the company of some inspiring or some inspiring person, we feel compelled to then do the same thing, namely to limit the sense desire. And then finally, the commentary recommends to listen to a suitable discourse, like a discourse on the hindrances, or a discourse on Chittanupassana, which is mindful contemplation of the mind. Now, the next hindrance is that of ill will, Vyapada Nivarana in the Pali scripture language, and it comes again just like the sense desire in a great variety of aspects. And the sense, the anger covers aspects such as aversion, hatred, disappointment, dissatisfaction, irritation, annoyance, animosity, dislike, desire to ill-treat, and desire to torment, to torture, and so on. And when this Vyapada Nivarana, the hindrance of ill will, arises in one's meditation practice, then easily a meditator may make a small or turn a small insignificant matter or issue into a very big issue. So it's kind of as if at this point the mind is magnifying things out of proportion, and oftentimes a meditator is not realizing what is going on. And the classical definition of for ill will is as follows, namely, ill will has the characteristic of savageness or ferocity, and savageness is then illustrated just like a provoked snake that is ready to attack you. And there are two functions to this ill will. One is given as to spread, just like a drop of poison will spread, and the second one is to burn up its own support, just like a forest fire will burn up all the fuel in the form of trees and branches and the needles that have fallen to the ground and the leaves. And the manifestation of ill will or hatred is as persecuting, just like an enemy would go after an opponent when having a good opportunity to do so. And the proximate cause for the arising of ill will is given as any ground for annoyance. So agata watu in the Pali scriptural language. And the last discourse of the Digha Nikaya, the long discourses of the Buddha, namely in the Samgiti Sutta, we find 9 causes for or grounds for annoyance. However, those 9 causes or grounds are not the only ones. Basically, the nature of the mind is such that anything will do to spark our anger. So, as illustrated earlier on, we may get totally upset about a fellow meditator sniffing, or we may also get upset when a meditator cuts in line while we're lining up for breakfast or lunch, or the same thing may happen on an interstate in Los Angeles when we're driving there and someone else is taking over and then cutting in, and then sometimes all it takes is what? Just a wrong word, or a word wrongly perceived. So a word, a certain sentence that was intended to mean something positive, but gets perceived wrongly, and anger springs up in the mind. So this happens much more quickly than we may think. And there are, as usual, things that lead to the nourishing of ill will, and there are also things that lead to the denourishing of ill will. And so when some ground for aversion has arisen, not paying attention to it. So, in the presence of unwise attention, thinking, "Oh well, it doesn't matter if I'm just a little bit angry." Then the initial anger may then turn into a great rage. And so the denourishing of ill will is given as or it comes through loving kindness, the practice of loving kindness. And the Buddha says, cultivate the meditation on loving kindness, for by cultivating the meditation on loving kindness, ill will disappears. Now, some of the ways of overcoming this hindrance of ill will are the following, namely, as usual, mindfulness itself, and then secondly, learning the meditation on loving kindness, then thirdly, actually doing it, and then also considering that one is the owner of one's deeds. So in the end, if one does perform some unwholesome act out of anger, then one should certainly be well aware that this will have negative consequences. So vipaka will be there. And this point is very important to bring to the mind of those who are fighting an insurgency or government forces that then are counter-fighting an insurgency. So especially when people or larger groups of people get at each other and trying to take each other's lives. And so the act of killing is clearly a heinous act, and so brings tremendous karmic consequences with it. Now, the commentary to the Satipatthana Sutta recommends wise consideration as another form of dealing with ill will. And in the sense that if one gets angry, or if one is angry and then acts on one's anger by wanting to harm another person, then it's like throwing sand into the wind. The sand will do what? It will come back and fall right onto one's own head. So the first one to suffer is the person who throws the sand into the wind. And so keep in mind that when we try to inflict some harm on another being, we are the ones to get harmed first before we can actually harm another person. The commentary has a very clear illustration for this. It's like being angry and then getting hold of some or grabbing some burning, glowing coals and intending to throw these at one's opponent. Who will get burned first? Well, the person who throws them. And then noble friendship and listening to proper discourse as usual are other ways of overcoming this ill will. Now, the next hindrance is that of restlessness. restlessness and remorse. And so as human beings, as unenlightened human beings, we tend to carry a lot of restlessness around with us. And so oftentimes people don't even realize this, and they think it's quite normal to scratch here, to scratch there, to shift the posture this way, that way, open the eyes, close the eyes, from sitting to jump into the standing posture, and then from there into the walking posture, and then into the lying posture, and so on and so forth. Now, these are just external manifestations of restlessness. Actually, almost worse is the mental manifestation, or the mental form of or mental restlessness, which comes as the inability to stay with one predominant object of observation for a longer period of time. And instead, what does the mind do? You focus it on your predominant object, and instead it goes somewhere else. It flits here, it flits there, it goes into the future, it goes into the past, but it doesn't stay with the object that you want it to be with. And this then is rather unsatisfactory. Now, the mental state of restlessness is defined as possessing or having the characteristic of disquietude of the mind. And its function is certainly pretty obvious, namely to make the mind steady. So to make, in the case of tranquility, the opposite of restlessness, its function is to steady the mind, to crush the disquietude. Here, the mental state or mental factor of restlessness does the opposite. It does everything to whip up the mind. And so then it manifests as certain turmoil in the mind. Now, unless we have experienced for ourselves the stillness of the mind, some amount of silence of the mind, we will not realize how much turmoil is going on in the mind. And so learning about the mind frequently occurs by way of contrast. First seeing one opposite, and then seeing the other opposite. And it is then in comparing both certain extremes that it becomes obvious how much restlessness or how much turmoil was going on in the mind. Now, the approximate or nearest cause for the arising of restlessness is given as unwise attention. And so if said like this, you might not understand what is meant. And what this points to is simply, in the case of some disquietude of the mind or turmoil in the mind, thinking, oh, this is quite okay. This is the natural state of affairs. Let the mind be flitting, or let it go here and there. What's wrong with this? It's always been like this, so why change it? Why work towards certain tranquility? So that would be unwise attention. Wise attention is realizing that this flitting of the mind is actually undesirable, it's unwholesome, it's not very beneficial, and then you make a concerted effort to bring the mind back into the primary object again and again. Now, both these mental states, namely restlessness as well as worry, manifests in the mind as agitation. And so restlessness and worry are somewhat similar, although not quite. The characteristic of worry is subsequent regret. So one has done or said something that then later on one regrets. And the function of worry is to feel sorrow, to feel sorry, or the sorrow that arises based on what one has or has not done. And worry manifests as remorse. And the proximate cause for the arising of worry lies in the wrongs of commission and omission. Now, this certainly needs some further explanation. The wrongs of commission and omission points to having done some wrong in the past, having done something or said something that later on one realizes wasn't all that skillful. And the other case is of realizing that maybe 5 years ago one just missed a wonderful opportunity to do something wholesome. And so it's a missed opportunity. And for both of these mental states, worry as well as restlessness, the opposing factor is tranquility, passaddhi in the Pali scriptural language. Now, a meditator may experience a fair amount of, stronger dose of restlessness and worry in the first insight knowledge, in the third insight knowledge, and then in the ninth insight knowledge, and also in the 10th insight knowledge. Now, so at various points in one's meditation practice, will these two mental defilements or this hindrance of restlessness and remorse come up. And for you to recognize it quickly and then to work with it and to overcome it as quickly as possible. Now, some other causes are there for the arising of restlessness and remorse. For restlessness, for one thing, it's the unwise attention, as discussed already, and then secondly, excessive effort, so an imbalance between effort and concentration, which usually is said to lead to restlessness, and indeed this happens. It happens just like this. And the Buddha furthermore in the Anguttara Nikaya 4, section 87, mentions provocative talk. So if while one is on retreat and one then disregards noble silence and gets into some discussion with another person, then something might be said that is somewhat provocative, and that then might lead to the arising of restlessness. And causes for the arising of remorse or worry are, as mentioned, the wrongs of commission and omission, and then also, and this is important, a clarity concerning the Dhamma. So a lack of clarity concerning the Dhamma. And so, not understanding a certain point properly, and thinking that one has done something wrong, when in fact maybe one hasn't done anything wrong. Now, the usual ways of overcoming this restlessness and remorse are through mindfulness, and then through much learning, investigation, and then familiarity with an ethical code of conduct. So restlessness and remorse may arise because one doesn't quite know how to interpret a certain rule. Should I or should I not do something? And then furthermore, association with mature people, good friendship, and suitable talk. Now, just for general knowledge, the restlessness that you might be experiencing once in a while will be around for a little longer. And what do you think? How long? In terms of the years or particular experience? There comes the right answer. Arahantship, so the attainment of Arahantship. And it's only through the attainment of Arahantship that through the path of Arahantship that the mental defilement of restlessness gets uprooted from the mind once and forever. And in the case of worry, kukucha, we are somewhat fortunate. We don't have to practice that far, and the third level of enlightenment is enough. But this is difficult. Now, the last hindrance is that of skeptical doubt, and I'll try to cut it short. The Dhammasangani, and this is interesting, includes under doubt uncertainty. And so uncertainty regarding many things. Uncertainty regarding what is wholesome and unwholesome. And so as long as this uncertainty is there, then doubts will be there, and the mind will be wavering. Now, other synonyms for uncertainty are being doubtful, perplexity, and then very nicely expressed, being in two minds. Why is this? Being in two minds or of two minds? Well, the mind has at least two options or more to choose from, and it's going back and forth between option A, B, and C, and possibly even D. And so as long as this is happening, the mind is not settled on one option. And this then is called indecisiveness, the inability to make up one's mind, the inability to come to a definite decision. And hesitation and wavering and the mental stiffness caused by indecision, vexation of the mind is also another way of putting it. And criticism would also come under doubt, under skeptical doubt, and what meditators report frequently is the comparing mind, comparing this practice to another practice that you may have done at some other time. And the objects of one's doubt may extend to, or it's not doubt whether it's going to rain tomorrow or not, but doubt from a religious point of view. And so doubt about the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, doubt about the meditation method, and then also doubt about the past and future existences. And the texts mention in the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta 2, paragraph 7, we find questions such as, was I in the past? Was I not in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? And then the same thing for the future. And then things like, am I not? So what am I? How am I? And so on. So and like I have mentioned earlier on, doubt oftentimes comes in the form of questions. And so the mind is plagued by these questions and the inability to make up one's mind. And so for meditators, by extension, another manifestation is there for doubt, not just comparing the methods, but then also debating back and forth, should I stay or should I not stay? And so this is a topic that at least twice or thrice comes up during one's intensive meditation practice. And it's really important to remember or to recognize the doubt as such and not to fall prey to it. Now, the texts also point out that by doubt we can distinguish between intellectual doubt and ethical doubt, and what is meant here is the ethical doubt or skeptical doubt, and not the methodical doubt, so doubt about the method. Doubt about the method, the Buddha actually did encourage. You will have heard of the Kalama Sutta, where the Buddha very much encourages people to question his certain teachings and to accept only what one has found personally to be true. Now, the characteristic of doubt is simply doubting, and the function of it is wavering, is to waver, and the manifestation of it is as indecisiveness or as taking sides. And the proximate cause for the arising of doubt is given as unwise attention. And the skeptical doubt can be detrimental to one's meditation practice if one is not careful, if one doesn't recognize it quickly enough. Now, the ordinary ways of overcoming this skeptical doubt is by way of mindfulness, and then by being knowledgeable about the Buddha's or Buddhist texts, and then seeking a clarification of the discourses through questioning, and then being well versed with ethical conduct, and then strong commitment in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and having good friends and suitable conversations. Now, there are many other things that could be said about doubt, but we're running out of time. Now, in general, we can say that when doubt is well established in the mind, then faith will have a hard time to arise. And so if you happen to be one of those who is rather critical and always doubting many different things, then this will make the meditation somewhat difficult, and then you should start to work with that doubting mind, and so and then you should try to you should work with it and try to be mindful of it and try to overcome it. And when there is much doubting, then this paves the way to much thinking, and when there's much thinking, then it goes without saying that one's practice can't develop properly. And another practical observation that the Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita likes to point out to or likes to mention is when a meditator is not working well, diligent enough, and with appropriate amount of effort, then the experiences will be somewhat unclear. And based on unclear experiences, well, there'll be much skeptical doubt, and then this will lead to no or to the absence of faith. And whereas on the positive side, if we practice with much diligence and a fair amount of effort and good mindfulness and so on, then we'll have clear-cut experiences. Clear-cut experiences will inspire us and will lead to the arising of faith, and that then will lead us to make even more effort in the practice. Now, should one experience plenty of doubt, over and over again, then one could take the doubt itself as one's teacher, and one then kind of does a study into this mental state of doubt. One then observes very carefully what are the conditions that precede the doubting mind, and then when doubt has arisen, what are the ways and means of successful ways and means of overcoming the doubt. And then gradually one becomes more and more familiar with it, and so eventually doubt shouldn't be a problem anymore. And also it helps to realize that whatever project one is involved in, if one does it with a doubting mind, then one will not be able to apply oneself to it wholeheartedly. So if 50% of one's mental energy goes into doubts, is this project of mine that I'm involved in, let's say some PR project for something useless, then is this really all that beneficial? Then one will not do it wholeheartedly. Likewise for the meditation practice, if the mind is ridden by doubts about the benefits of the meditation practice and one's own ability and so on, then one can put all of one's heart and mind into the practice, and the practice won't be that clear-cut. Now, these are just some ways of working with doubt. There would be more to say, but time doesn't permit. So let me conclude today's Dhamma talk on the five hindrances by wishing that may all of you, as mentioned in the Satipatthana Sutta, be aware of the presence of the hindrances, and may you also be aware or mindful of the absence of the hindrances when they are absent, and thus being mindful of the presence of the hindrances, may it lead you to, or may you then be able to overcome those same hindrances, and thus with a mind purified, and a mind that is much lighter, more pliant and workable, may you develop your practice further and further until finally the experience of the peace of Nibbana becomes your own. And this is it for tonight. Okay. You have any questions or comments? Yes, please.
The one that I have the most trouble with is sloth and torpor.
Oh. Yes.
I don't know what about that, but I hope that you'll talk to me.
Well, with sloth and torpor, it leads to a rather lethargic state of mind, an inactive state of mind, and in the case of sloth, your mind will be sinking, literally sinking from an active state to a rather increasingly inactive state. And then the proximate, and in the case of torpor, the manifestation comes as as boredom, and as dullness of the mind, as sluggishness of the mind, drooping, nodding, and so on. And unwise attention to both of to these, to the sinking mind and to the sluggishness and so on, leads to the arising of sloth and torpor. And when in the case of sloth, if I'm not mistaken, it's takes the driving, it kind of drains the driving force of the mind. Now, when sloth and torpor have arisen, then we need to be we need to catch the sloth and torpor while it is approaching. Once it's there, fully or full-fledged, then there's not much that we can do. Then we're kind of like prisoners. But as it is approaching, it's useful to recognize it quickly, and then to be mindful of it, to label it, to observe it as best as we can. And if mindfulness is strong enough, then the sloth and torpor will disappear. Now, if mindfulness is not strong enough, then we need to maybe exert more effort. And simply trying harder, and one more moment of propelling the mind towards the observing mind, towards the object, and again another moment that we send the mind towards the object. So this done over and over again. And Other ways of dispelling sloth and torpor are by, as the Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita likes to point out, apart from effort, also aiming, namely precisely aiming the mind at the predominant object of observation, and this aiming has the tendency of opening up the mind. And sloth and torpor are said to lead to a shrinking of the mind. The mind is shrinking, it's withering. And so, by applying aiming, this changes the picture. Also, by applying effort, the heat of ardent effort, this will also get the mind going, the kind of inactive mind. And then, what else can you do? Well, you could intentionally, let's say you're observing the rising and falling over and over again, and so just two objects, and then a certain boredom arises, and then based on this sloth and torpor that comes in, then you could consider observing different objects, main objects in a row, in a sequence, such as rising, falling, sitting, touching, and then again rising, falling, sitting, touching. So sometimes that helps to overcome the sloth and torpor. And then what else could you do? Well, make sure that you're, oftentimes with the sloth and torpor, the sitting posture is slouched, and so by straightening one's posture, the sloth and torpor might disappear. Or you could open your eyes and let the daylight penetrate penetrate into the eyes, and this then might energize the mind. And then in the text, another method is recommended if one has spent much time inside of a meditation hall, and let's say somewhat darker in there, then one could go outside, and in particular at night look at the stars, and in this way this might help to overcome the sleepiness.
I do find that the walking meditation outside,
yes,
I don't know, I work better.
Yeah, then use that. No. Then if you find something, then sitting after sitting, you're nodding off. Then do more walking meditation. And this will help to then energize, or to get your both your body and your mind going. And then there are other methods around, like the texts recommend pulling one's earlobes, or sprinkling cold water into the face, or what I oftentimes recommend is to do standing meditation, either on one's cushion or next to it, for 15 to 20 minutes with eyes closed. And in standing meditation, there's always the danger of losing one's balance and falling over, and this in most cases does the trick. But there are meditators who are so tired that even standing meditation doesn't work, and then when I recommend walking meditation, they say they fall asleep while walking. So you've got a few ways there, ways and means to overcome sloth and torpor. Then what else? Yes.
When a hindrance appears, I'm thinking especially about restlessness.
Yes.
Do you try to fight it and mindfully make it disappear, or do you just use mindfulness and let it run its course?
No, you do the second, namely, you try to be mindful of it, and you observe it as best as you can. unless the restlessness becomes really excessive and out of control. So as a last resort, you can simply just cut it off. So with restlessness as well as the other hindrances, it's good, especially in the beginning, to work with it, to observe it for a fair amount of time to get to know the respective hindrance, and then only if a hindrance becomes excessive, out of control, then to cut it off.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, if there are no further comments, then maybe this much for tonight.